Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. It's my privilege this morning to review a book I really do think is excellent, very, very helpful for me in my practice and for many other people. It's Reynolds and Clark, Renewal of Business Tenancies, now in a 5th edition, been written by two people, Kirk Reynolds and Wayne Clark. It comes to us from Sweet and Maxwell and Thomson Reuters, and Elizabeth and I gave the title of our review the following: Renewal of Business Tenancies, Staying Abreast of New Developments. Very important to do that in the modern commercial field, and it's always very important to know exactly where we are with what is happening in tenancy agreements. I'll talk about the book in a moment. Let's have a look at it first. It's a heavy book, Sweet Maxwell, green cover. There we go. Front. It's part of the Property and Conveyancing Library for Sweet and Maxwell, Thomson Reuters. You can see the spine there. There's nothing on the back, but there's the front and the spine. It's a heavy book. If we go right to the back straight away, it's paragraph numbering for the index. So you can see immediately the index is quite substantial, and I think you'll find that very helpful. And there's always the little note about Sweet and Maxwell's legal taxonomy, which is mentioned now in most of their titles. Then you've got a couple of appendices right at the back. The book runs to 950 odd pages, extracts from, of course, statutes included in the appendices. There's the front cover there, and go to the main cover there. And then after that we move into, this is the basic detail. First edition came out in 1997, so it's 20 years ago. And then there's a preface which sets out what this new book is. Mentions quite a lot of the new case law, which the two authors from Falk and Chambers have set out. They wrote the preface at the end of last year, and then there's a preface to the 3rd edition from Mr. Justice Morgan, which goes back a little way. Then the table of contents, quite a large detailed sets of contents there running all the way through. We'll get towards the end. There are 16 chapters in total. Then you have a series of appendices, the statutes and the statutory regulations, and then the index at the back. Then table of cases, of course, lots and lots of cases. Then after the cases, tables of statutes, and then guess what? Table of statutory instruments. And then after that, we then get straight into the book itself. Chapter 1. Does the Act apply? Checklist. This is the original Act. It sets out, you can see here, there's the paragraph numbering and there's the footnoting at the bottom. And it looks specifically at exactly where we are concerning the relevant legislation. And of course, since then, we've got a large amount of additional legislation. And if I just go to the back of the book, which I mentioned to you before with the appendix, I'll just get to Appendix 1 and just find that for you. There we go. The original statute, the Landlord and Tenant Act 1927, which is there, and then of course the 1954 Act, which most people will be familiar with, Landlord and Tenant Act 1954, and so forth. Then you've got various other pieces of legislation thereafter. It's a heavy book, as I say, runs to something approaching 900, well, nearly 1,000 pages actually, so it's a heavy book, but an important book. And I think anybody who's involved, certainly in terms of this area of law, it's not really for the company director as such, but business tenancies themselves are a little area of their own, if I can put it that way. And I think it's important to keep up to date with where we are today on what is happening, because quite often in the real run of things, business tenancies are possibly overlooked a little bit in some areas, but it's about wealth and it's about money to a very large extent. So what do we say about the book? Well, Elizabeth and I discussed it, and she wrote most of it, but she says here, who knew practitioners who do not necessarily specialise in landlord and tenant matters, specifically business tenancies, may not quite appreciate the sheer magnitude and complexity of this area of law. Astonishing is probably the word. What they need and what you need if you wish to keep abreast of current developments is this ever-expanding field. In this ever-expanding field is this new edition. This is the 5th edition for 2017. It's now, as I say, in this brand new version. It comes from Sweet and Maxwell, and it's established itself, I think, since the first edition came out 20 years ago, as the definitive legal textbook in this area. So if you have got a problem as a practitioner and you do need reference, this book will give you, I think, a lot of guidance, which I think will be very, very helpful. It's highly regarded for its clarity, accuracy and authority, as to be expected, of course. It's a big book, as I say, about 1,000 pages to be precise. Now, the authors are Kirk, Reynolds and Wayne Clark. Reynolds is a Queen's Counsel, and both of them explain that the new edition has been expanded to include much new material, both judicial and statutory. And as I said, there are quite a lot of new cases which are mentioned right at the beginning in the foreword. What they're doing is they want to encompass the developments that have taken place since the previous edition was published in 2012. And obviously there's an expanded commentary on both key cases and judgments, which I think will be very helpful. It certainly saves time trying to go to some of the other journals and the other places to find the information, because you've got it all here, depending on the type of brief that you are receiving. And I've done a few of these types of case, and it's always useful to have something where you actually have got a ready set of cases and judgments to look at without having to pour through lots of stuff in the library. What the author says, we record the expansion of the size of this book not with apology or regret, but with enthusiasm. Well, I hope the trees are happy with that. It indicates that the renewal of of business tenancies is a dynamic subject and underlines the importance to all practitioners of keeping abreast with all developments as they occur. And of course the focus of the first chapter is the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954, which has been amended, of course, by the 2003 Regulatory Reform Order. This and the subsequent 15 chapters examine every conceivable aspect of what has become a complicated subject, including the continuation and termination of tenancies and the timing and tactics that should be applied in serving notice. That, I suggest, is very important when you're coming to advise a client in conference about some of these issues, because tactics do, I have to say, come into it. And to cite other examples, the 4th chapter of the book deals with grounds of opposition, like persistent arrears, the common one, of course, and the terms of the new tenancy, and that again can, of course, cause a lot of friction. The chapters following chapter 4 offer a range of things, including plenty of practical advice on carrying out the order, preparing for a hearing, improvements, procedure and compromise, plus a particularly interesting final chapter on electronic communications code and, of course, the 54 Act, which, as I say, will be relevant to a lot of people, and it may be of interest to the academic world to a certain extent as well, although this is more, I think, for practitioners. It's certainly a legal reference book which has both scope and erudition, and of course it can to some be a trifle daunting, but you get into the book and work out how it's structured. It's not that difficult to follow. It's been carefully structured, in my view, to facilitate looking things up and navigating successfully, and it's in this area that the book also excels. The table of contents is almost minutely detailed. As I've said, it's very detailed. I'll show that again in a moment. The footnoting is very extensive and the paragraphs are numbered throughout, which is very helpful. Also, note the useful index at the back, which is detailed, and almost 50 pages containing tables of cases, statutes and statutory instruments. It's fair to say that no practitioner specialising in this field should be without a copy of Reynolds and Clark in this up-to-date expanded edition. And the publication date is cited as at 2017. Now let's have a little look at the book again. There it is. It's quite a heavy book, I have to say. There it is. There's the side, and then there's nothing on the back. Just opening it up, let me just go to the index again, just to remind you. The index is very much the house style. It follows the Sweet and Maxwell legal taxonomy, which is mentioned there. And then you've got the appendices. As I said, Appendix 1 has the 1954 Act in. And if you open it in the middle, preparing for a hearing, evidence, expert evidence, there we go. A useful book for experts, I would have thought, as well. You've got the paragraph numbering at the sides, there and there. And of course, as I say, preparing for the hearing is always very important, both witness statements and oral evidence. And then going to the front of the book again, just to point out to you, there's the front of it. And do, of course, read the preface, because that gives you some idea of what is new. I'd like to thank Kirk, Reynolds and Wayne Clark very much indeed for this book. They do make our lives so much easier having these works of reference. This is where the law is. People often say to me, well, where can I find the law? Well, this is where it is. Unfortunately, these books are quite expensive. They are available in some libraries, but again, in this day and age, this information, basically, you do need to come to a legal advisor for advice if you've got a particularly difficult fight on your hands. But thank you to everybody concerned for this new edition. Most grateful to have it. And once again, a great debt of thanks to Sweet and Maxwell for continuing to publish these books for us. Thank you all. Bye-bye.